Episode 318 of Funny Book Forensics was recorded at Ocon in Omaha, Nebraska, actually Council Bluffs, Iowa. We have some audience interaction. Sometimes it's a little difficult to hear, and maybe the audio is a little bit different, but we wanted to give this live podcast a try. So we hope you enjoy this one, even if the audio quality is a little bit different than normal. And we're about to get right into the podcast, so I'll see you on the flip side. And why would you ever have Perez on the cover with digital on interior? That doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense.
I
just hit record. I just started recording because
this is a normal way we start the podcast. I mean, we just start talking. So
somebody hits record, and then all of a sudden,
Greg, you're supposed to let me know.
I never let you know
before we're dropping historical bombs.
Sometimes I hit the button, sometimes I forget, and then like 20 minutes later, you're like, "Did you start recording?" And I say no, and then we got to re-record a whole entire podcast.
You're crushing me right now.
I have crushed your soul.
There's all sorts of things going on around us. We are at Ocon right now. We've got a puppet fight going on in the podcast room right in front of us.
Puppet fight in the podcast room.
I'm not really sure what's going on, but what was brought to us, we had a wonderful, not even listener, mind you, new listener as of right now.
I'm listening.
We now have, I'd just like to share, we've got an audience here.
We now have, this is so weird.
We now have, officially, we have 4 listeners.
4.
We now officially have 4 listeners.
Do you count the puppets? That's 2 more.
That is 5. 1, 2. I can do math. That's 5 plus 1 is 6. We now have officially 6. And Iggy,
that's
our host here at Ocon,
yeah.
from Project Nerd.
Yeah,
so that means we now have had 7 listeners to the podcast.
Oh
so
my gosh.
Ocon has helped us go from 1 to 7. That is a 7 times increase. This is a record increase for this podcast. And we're going down a listener now. It was happening. I thought we were out. Well,
I thought we scared them away.
I've promised Greg for a long time that if one comic showed up to us that we would do it.
What would we do?
I guess a comic from a comic series.
Yes.
And what amazes me is that there's 2 facts that amaze me on this comic. There's a couple things I want to point out before we disclose to the listeners what this comic is. Number 1, this comic's value was 60 cents. This is what it was sold for, 60 cents. By the way, audience out there, 60 cents. As you can see, this comic out here was 60 cents. But on this inside cover, it looked like it was being sold for 50 cents.
10 cents less.
So this comic book was so famous that somebody wrote in pencil that it was sold for 50 cents after it was purchased for 60 cents.
It decreased in value.
Yeah, and you know, you didn't write in comics in pencil like maybe in the 80s. So this comic was published in 1983. So probably around like late 1983, somebody had marked it down to 50 cents.
50 cents.
And so we're talking about one of the most valuable comic books of all time.
All time.
But since we have the actual comic book today instead of one of those awful scans, we have all our advertisements in here too.
Oh my gosh, the best. This is actually the only reason I really, really love to read these comics with you, Dan. I think you just stopped recording.
I did not stop recording.
Okay. Oh gosh. Oh my god. See, this is what happens. Well, no, just leave. Don't touch the computer. Oh my gosh. Okay. This is like the first time we've ever had an audience,
right.
And
I know. And we don't even have equipment to it'd be awesome if we had this cool setup where we could put the comic down on the table and it displayed the pages up for everybody.
But we don't have that.
But we don't have that.
No.
What we have is a Dan. And so I can show you that we're doing US 1 number 3.
Number 3.
The Rime of the Ancient Highwayman. And what we have is a ridiculously nice Michael Golden cover.
It is beautiful.
And if you could just see this, if you can just imagine, we've got... Actually, we don't know who he is yet.
We don't.
So we're going to hold off because we didn't read issues 1 or 2.
No.
And I can tell you with pretty confidence. With confidence, we're probably not reading issues 1 and 2.
Oh, we will. We will. Now that we've read number 3, we have to go back and read number 1 and 2.
You know how much of a completist I am, and I still don't know if that's necessarily happening after reading this issue.
It is.
What I can tell you is we've got some crazy Kirby Crackle going on all over this cover. I had no idea Michael Golden did Kirby Crackle.
Me neither.
I thought he only drew large breasts, so I really didn't even know he knew how to. You don't really Kirby Crackle around that area of the anatomy when you're drawing. So
not what
it's just a little bit crazy. And US 1, usually US 1 has this nice road sign looking feel to it. Yeah. And we've got the outline of the interstate here, but we've got Kirby Crackle going on all behind it. It's pretty fantastic. And we've got a truck, and his truck has gone from blue and red to, I guess we don't know because we haven't read the issue, but I have. So we've got a yellow...
I read the issue just like you told me
It's like a yellow golden truck driving through Kirby Crackle. It's all pink. And then we've got this crazy, lightning guy?
Yeah, lightning guy. Ooh.
He sort of looks like a lightning... I mean, if I was a Legion fan, and I am, he might look like one of the Lightning Beasts of Kor'bal. And if you don't know the Lightning Beasts of Kor'bal, I am so sorry. Talk to me after this podcast, and we will make sure you're square on that.
Get on it.
So we're going to get into this Rime of the Ancient Highway Mariner. No, I already messed that up.
Highwayman.
I'm already trying to change it to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Do you see where I'm going there? And maybe some of these things will play into this book. I mean, this book could be a copy of other stories. I don't know. Or maybe just the Highwayman, like, on his horse he did ride.
On his horse he
Sword
did
and
ride.
pistol by his side. I'm not going to try to be Johnny Cash right now because that's a losing game for me. So we're going to go there.
But you never know. You never know.
I will just also share out with our listeners, because we do like to point this out. This comic is, of course, pure and was approved by Comics Code Authority. So there's nothing wrong with it, and it could never harm your children.
It's safe for them to digest.
And it's from the 80s. And so Jill, just since we do have a live audience especially, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to guess that there's probably things that are offensive in this book. So literally just be prepared for that, because this is a book written in 1983, and there is a character, well, we'll get to those.
I'm going to say there is a highly likely, yes, offensive.
It's not highly likely offensive. It is straight up offensive.
Straight up offensive.
But hey, we're going to go with that. So we've got our first advertisement. We've got Scotty in a Cracker Jack story.
Oh.
And Scotty is playing baseball.
Made me hungry.
And unlike me playing baseball, I had a Little League average of .087. And my dad was the coach, so I got to keep score, and I knew how to keep score. And they had a little chart in the back of the book that showed you your batting average, and it was awesome. And I was so excited. And my batting average was 0 for a long time.
0.
And I just kept dreaming,
bad.
and I would add up my number of at-bats, and I kept seeing, on the chart, if you got 1, what your average would be. And so I finally got a hit, and then my batting average was .87. Not .87, sorry, .087. Let's be very clear. Less than 1 hit per 10 at-bats. And I was very excited. But it's very clear, Scotty, if I had just gotten a hit, I would have got a whole box of Cracker Jack. And if you call it Cracker Jacks, I will punch you.
Cracker Jack.
Okay.
I don't want to get punched.
Because there's
Have you seen Dan's arms? Look at his arms. They're
toy
big.
surprise
They're
inside.
Scary.
So, all right. Well, we opened to the first page of Rime of the Ancient Mariner Highway 1. Stan Lee presents. Now, the fact that we're still one, Jim Shooter is the editor of Marvel Comics at this time. And I don't even know if Stan Lee is working for the company at this point. But we've got Stan Lee presents, and Stan Lee is so proud. We've got Stan Lee right up here at the front cover of the book because he's going to present US 1.
US 1.
Well, what I do know about US 1 is I thought US 1 was just a bad comic series because somebody thought it was a good idea to have trucks drive around in the Marvel Universe and then talk about the truck drivers. I don't even know did we even find out the sentient truck in this?
It's a truck that he has control. I mean, he technically has control over it with his robot brain, but the truck kind of controls itself, kind of, sort of.
That's fair. There are robot brains in this book.
Yeah, big brain robot man.
Well, anyway, we get a front panel and we get a colorful semi speeds across the hellish alien highway as demonic spirits sear the air. Ooh. So is it an alien highway or is it the highway to hell?
Highway to hell. It's Denver. Yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah.
So
it is actually.
And we get this nice. Actually, I think the art's pretty cool.
Yeah, very, very delicious looking. Everything is delicious.
Well, we have this written. This is written by Marvel. You
gotta read this, every single line of this. This is because this is the Rime of the Ancient Highwayman.
I think this is important. Okay, written with tongue-in-cheek by Al Milgrom. So Al was very proud of this one, based on what he wrote right here in his own credits. We've got penciled with fine technique by Frank Springer, who we'll get to in a moment. Inked with hardly a leak by Mike Esposito. And Mike must have been really proud of this one, because I know with Mike Esposito's long track record as a fine inker at Marvel Comics, I'm sure this issue of US 1 was his proudest achievement. We've got colored with a brush antique by Paul Becton. We've got edited by a man with a very large beak, Ralph Macchio, and not that Ralph Macchio.
I
just want to make sure.
The Karate Kid.
There was also a Ralph Macchio that was an editor at Marvel Comics. So I just want everybody. I got confused by that for a while. I was like, is that
Cobra
cool?
Kai,
Yeah, when I was a kid, I thought Ralph Macchio edits comics. This is the greatest thing ever. And then he goes on in the movies and makes one illegal kick. He makes one illegal kick and ruins Johnny's entire life.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
And it got supervised with an eye toward critique by Jim Sharpshooter, the youngest writer of comics ever. I think.
Yeah.
At what, 13 years old? Thumbnailed
comics.
his own books.
You too can be that person.
And then he became the editor of Marvel Comics, and everything was downhill from there. He should have just stuck with writing comics as a 13-year-old and just never come back.
So I have to make a note here. Without all of Dan's commentary, every single line rhymed. Okay.
I'm not into rhyming. Around. It's a comic book.
Falling off. But it makes sense because it's the rhyme of the ancient highwayman.
All right. Well, we start out this book and we are automatically set into a dream sequence, which is fantastic because we don't know what happened in the first 2 issues. So we're in a dream sequence, and let's see. It's Archer. I'm gonna mess up his name now. I still haven't seen a name yet. Well, that's okay. We don't know his name because we haven't read the book. So there's a truck driver, and he has blonde hair and a headband because it's the 80s. And it's a red headband, and it's amazing. Think the Supergirl headband, but way lamer because it's not on Supergirl.
Not on Supergirl.
And if you don't know the Supergirl headband from the 80s, you're missing out because it's fantastic and everybody needs to see it in life.
Super good.
So what we've got here is we've got a guy and a truck and a robot brain and a woman with a giant whip made of motorcycle parts.
Yeah, and she's on a really awesome motorcycle, I must add.
And we have no idea who this woman is.
She's just beating the crap out of him.
But what we do find out is our truck driver has a CB skull. So think about this. Just think, if I actually had a real brain, and this was translucent, and there was an amazing network of CB radio up here, because we put like 1 or 2 transistors. I don't even think that's that cool. Like if I had a CB in my head, I would never need cell phone batteries. I could just talk to everybody on the highway forever.
That's true.
We would just literally plug me into the cigarette lighter and I'd be ready to go.
Could we say you would go ham, man? Oh, you got it.
You got me. That's the first time I broke on this one so far, and there will be many other times. So anyway, our hero
yes.
awakens. And I want you to know, this is the most muscular truck driver I have ever seen in my life. We're talking like blonde-haired Rambo here. Like, this is amazing. He's rippling,
Kinda, yeah.
Kinda. Well, now he has way too much hair to be Hulk Hogan. Arnold Schwarzenegger with a headband. I also want you to he wears his headband asleep.
Yeah, because everyone wears. You gotta be ready. You never know.
Ryu from Street Fighter.
Oh, yes.
That's Ryu from Street Fighter from our audience. For those of you listening to this podcast and you're not here, we do have some audience commentary, so we'll try to fill it in for you.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we've got it going on, and he's like
Mario in the room with him.
And then we're finding out we're meeting some of our characters.
Papa. I'm sorry.
We've got he wakes up and he screams, ah! Because that is really what it says.
Yeah,
Y-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-H. Yeah! Okay.
Oh, it is Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah! We get a woman here who we don't know yet, but we're going to find out about very soon. She says, "My gosh, Papa, that sounds like U.S."
Oh, that's his name. Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So his name is U.S.
Uncle Sam.
I think it's Ulysses. I think it's Ulysses.
Yes.
Well, we're going to find out.
We'll find out.
Sure, because I did find the research I got to do in an hour and a half for this. I was spot on with this research. I want to tell you all.
This is usually the course if you're not familiar with the podcast.
I may do a little bit of research most of the time. I did.
No, he doesn't. He lies.
He's so wrong. Well, anyway. We get a woman running in, and she's wiping the head of the man, and we get 2 more characters running in, and she's like, "Oh, I just couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt." So let's talk a little bit about Mr. Springer. So we had Frank Springer. So I didn't know a lot about Frank Springer, so I went and asked an expert. Bob Hall, if you've never met Bob Hall, comics legend in the comic book hall.
Boom, right there.
I had just walked in the door, Bob Hall. No. Bob Hall in the comic books room. You have a true legend out there, so if you don't take the opportunity to walk by and say hi to Bob Hall and introduce yourself, please do. I get a Bob Hall and I'm like, we're looking up Frank Springer. We can see that he drew some Nick Fury. Tell us about this man. And he said, oh, it's Bob Hall. Then he went through 7 artists he would compare Frank Springer through, which I'm not going to go through on this podcast. But then he said, Frank Springer was a great artist. What he should have been doing was the comics strips in the newspaper and drew like Mary Worth. Does anybody know who Mary Worth is? Everybody's like, oh
Okay,
my.
one.
So Mary Worth was like a soap opera comic. So basically, it was a comic strip, and every Monday through Friday you'd get, or Monday through Saturday you'd get a new episode of the soap opera. On then Sunday you'd get the color wrap up of the soap opera, and they'd either do it monthly or weekly, but they'd end a storyline on Sunday. So you'd get those comic strips. These are totally, I'm going to show you, these totally look like soap opera comics, right? These look like love comics, soap opera comics. And it's really interesting to see Frank Springer doing this, right, in this book, where I'm not going to argue with Bob Hall, ever, one.
No.
And number two, it does very much look like comic strip art. But I do think it's appropriate for the book because this isn't a book with superheroes, theoretically. I guess he's sort of a superhero. He's like a mechanical CB head superhero. So we're rolling around in this book. Well, and we've got the love story, and we're meeting, I guess, the parents. So we've got, at least we've met Big Papa, and we've got unnamed woman and unnamed woman. Okay.
Mary.
So now we get U.S. walking with Big Papa, and Big Papa wears a big red cap that says shortstop on it, and I'm really not sure, is he a baseball player, or does shortstop stand for something else?
I think it stands for something else.
Oh, I bet that's his diner.
Yeah.
Okay, that's got to be it.
Shortstop diner.
So, high road trucking, right? Everybody needs to go to a truck stop, and truck stop food is the best, right?
I mean, literally is.
Like, if you ate truck stop food every day, you would totally be the buffest truck driver in the world. This is clearly what we're getting. No? Like, well, I'm looking, I see the evidence right in front of me.
It's right there in US 1. I mean, don't lie to me, comic books.
Well, what we find out is the tragic story of Jeff.
No.
US's brother.
His big bro.
See what happened is Jeff and US were driving their trucks.
Wah, wah.
And then they ran into the secret black truck. And the black truck drove by them. And the black truck was, Jeff says, good Lord, flashback, it's the highwayman.
No, not the highwayman.
And the highwayman runs the truck off the road and it goes careening off a cliff. And poor Jeff is dead off panel. And only US is left alive. And US says, and there was no trace of Jeff was ever found. I swore I wouldn't rest until I found the highwayman. And then a man in the back of the diner says, excuse me, young fella, because everybody that drives a truck has to have sort of a little southern accent and say things like, excuse me, young fella, because that's how people talk in the South.
Or at truck stops.
Yeah, I've seen. And now we get a nice conversation with this old-timer.
The old-timer.
And the old-timer's telling the story of the highwayman. And we have a young truck driver. And he started out, which looks like clearly in the 1920s when trucks had a single axle. So basically a truck apparently according to this picture, a truck was like a thing with some oil on top. And then it had one axle going down the whole thing. And that held the whole truck together. So I could see where he'd be traumatized.
It looks like one of those old truck banks you would get at Christmas time as a child that you would play with or not play with because it might be worth a lot of money someday. So those old Hess trucks that my dad used to buy me, like I would get one every year. And I have like 20 of them. Boy.
It's terrifying.
I know, super terrifying. But yeah,
and they're all still in your garage.
I know. Shut up.
So now, like, we find out that the highwayman, he just can't keep up with the young truck drivers, so he wants to keep up. And what he does is he goes to a spirit, and he persisted in his search to find youth, and eventually he found the help he sought. And the demon says to him, because we have to have demons.
Yeah.
This progressed very quickly, by the way.
It's the 80s.
This guy wanted to be like a good truck driver, and now he's like... Well, anyway, you seek youth and powerful. Youth and power. That's a weird. There's a.
I told you
parentheses,
the writing is wonky.
You seek youth and power very well. Our master can grant you these boons. Boons. No, it says boons.
Okay. Well, again, we had to revisit the fact that we have a letterer writing a comic book.
That's true.
So, I mean, traditionally,
who was the letterer?
No, the person writing the comic book was a letterer. To begin with.
That's fair. And it's Michael Higgins. I don't know Michael Higgins' lettering history. And he must have been one of Marvel's best letterers since I know nothing about his history, and he got put on US 1. So clearly we're looking at the high quality. I mean, they were going after John Costanza for this one, right? Like
George Costanza, love his work.
No.
Okay.
John, no.
Okay.
No. Well, anyway, so what we find out was the price was his soul, because that is pronounced. And there's like little, it's not even Kirby crackle, it's just like squiggly lines around it.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. He's a trucker. He makes a pact with a demon for his soul
to be a better trucker. To be the best trucker, because he wants to be the best. No, it's not Man, Bear, Pig.
Man, Bear, Pig.
No, this is completely different.
This sounds a lot like Man, Bear, Pig.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, well.
It sounds like a more mundane version of Spawn.
Man, Bear, Pig.
It's the trucking version of Spawn. That's a good call out.
Trucker Spawn.
Trucker Spawn.
Okay.
Maybe young Todd McFarlane was reading US
Oh
1.
my gosh.
And in his brain, he was like, what can I do that's better than a trucker that sells his soul to a demon? I can do Spawn.
We find out the backstory is these 12 issues were his favorite comics.
You know, if we had just... So, for those of you in the audience and our listeners that don't know, Todd McFarlane owned the comic store in our hometown, Puyallup, Washington. And I have all sorts of early Spawn issues signed by Todd McFarlane because he would just come to the store.
Hey guys,
and we're like
going?
Kids, and we're like, oh, we'll sign your book. This is the greatest. I'm like, who is this guy? Oh, this guy's amazing. He's
the new up and coming guy.
Yeah, it's great. And his brother-in-law owned the store, so we just went there.
You guys like toys? He's gonna start making toys. They're really cool.
And if I could go back in time and just ask Todd McFarlane, Todd, was Spawn inspired by US 1?
And he'd be like, hey guys, let me tell you a little inside baseball.
Actually,
yes, it was.
He'd say, hey guys, I know I've let you come to the store for a while, but I don't think you're allowed back.
Yeah, he would be like, so you owe me $5.
Well, what we find out is the old timer comes back and he says, no man can beat him, none can escape his grasp. If you manage somehow to survive one encounter with him, consider yourself lucky.
Man, Bear, Pig.
And then he storms out of the door. Slam.
Exactly.
And
dun, dun, dun.
All our characters in the diner are going,
because they don't know what to do.
By the way, that visual I just did was very good for audio.
It was so good. Because he walks out, everybody is stunned.
And I kind of look like my dog pointing at a squirrel. Wow. So it was good. All right, so... Well, we better move through the story because we're going to be here like 7 hours.
Oh, they are at the shortstop, Dan. Look at that.
Oh, the shortstop is the truck stop. I knew it. Okay,
you knew it.
I got this. I'm reading through this story. Al, I got you. I got your back. I'm covering up this good... I'm not covering up anything. This is phenomenal writing. I don't have to cover anything.
The art is fantastic. I love it.
So the art is fantastic, actually. So we get, hey, wait a minute, and U.S. runs out after, and he's gone. The old man's gone without a trace. There's no
He's
truck.
nowhere to be seen.
In fact, it is just like classic. You aren't going to see it. We've got classic old empty road. I think they probably have run that little print. That little panel has probably been in like 75 Marvel comics.
It's been reused so many times. It's almost like a trauma film with Sergeant Bukaki. Or Sergeant Kabuki. I'm sorry, I messed up.
What? What are you on?
Totally different movie.
You are trying to get me to have to edit this podcast. Like, this is a live-to-tape show, and you drop that?
It's a delicious food dish.
Don't look it up.
It's a noodle dish.
Don't look it up. Okay. No, it's not.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's a ramen dish. Yeah. Other people turn it into other things. Whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a ramen dish. So... All right, so now we meet our cast because we're going to be introduced to a new character, and I'm very excited.
New character.
We get some characters. They stop in the shortstop store. Shortstop truck stop. Shortstop truck stop.
Shortstop
truck stop. And we get...
It's so fun to say. Come on, everybody.
We meet Taryn O'Connell at your service, and the man who spoke the words of wisdom is... Retread. My name is Retread, just Retread. I'm not going to say what Greg read this as the first time.
I'm dyslexic, okay? That's how I got the wrong name on the last thing I said.
It's also an 80s book, so we just assumed it was really terrible.
And I had to reread this thing a couple of times, and I asked 3 other people at the table to reread it with me.
But it gets worse. Are you ready? We find out Retread is introduced to some other characters. We meet Ed Wheeler, Wide Load Annie, U.S. Archer, and the hired help, who introduces herself as Mary McGrill. Yes, the same Mary that rushed the U.S. Archer U.S. side as he was, yeah. So, okay, that's Wide Load Annie. Completely, that's a name that would roll now.
I think a lot of the names would have to be changed. And then situations later.
To protect Al Milgrom.
changes in the book would definitely have to be made.
Well, we're going to skip ahead just a tiny bit here because we've got some nice dialogue like any Mary Worth comic. We've got to sit down and we have a nice diner conversation when we learn about Retread. And then Retread tells him the whole story of the old-timer.
Old-timer whole story. Gives him the download.
And we're finding out this old-timer might not be such a great guy. So
He might be a bad dude.
It could happen. So now Retread goes out with US and they get in the giant US-1 truck. And now, remember how it was yellow on the cover when we saw this?
Yeah.
I know you can't see that all in the back, but do you see this beautiful blue, red, white, and blue truck? Is this not the greatest truck of America ever? I mean, if I was going to have an America truck in 1983, this is it.
That's the truck.
Like,
you want to ride it.
I think that Ronald Reagan personally rode and endorsed this truck, and Nancy Reagan made this part of the anti-drug campaign.
I mean, just say no.
To trucking. Well, as our intrepid heroes, our intrepid truck drivers move down the street, Retread is chatting it up, or actually he's thinking, and we find out that Retread's reverie, because I don't know how they choose the words in this book, but they don't want me to be able to read it, because I don't know if you can say Retread's reverie 3 times fast.
Well, he's Retread.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would imagine he would say stuff double back, because it's a retread. Yeah.
I just think if you were a truck driver too, Retread's probably not the right name. That's not the tires you want.
No, you don't. You want like new, fresh tires, or you don't want retreads or double slicks because that's just bad.
Well, maybe that's why he's in the passenger seat.
He's not a good driver.
Well, anyway, as US is going down the road, he's suddenly surrounded by 3 other trucks and people are firing guns at the truck.
Oh, no.
And we are in real trouble right now. And thank God we are interrupted by a Bubble Yum ad. So
it's like when you're watching a bad video on YouTube and it pauses. You're like, oh, nobody got hurt.
And I love Bubble Yum, and that's the grape flavor.
Yeah,
the grape flavor always lasted longer than the strawberry flavor.
It pretty much did.
Did you know it was owned by Nabisco? I'm shocked.
I did not.
Who also brought us those drug issues.
Oh, yeah, all those drug issues.
Let's not talk about that because I'm going to be sad.
That's a dark time in the podcast, everybody.
It was a dark time in the podcast.
But you should go back and listen to them because they're hilarious.
I don't know. I was pretty angry.
That's why they're
3
hilarious.
straight weeks. Well, anyway, we get a giant drug fight. Drug fight?
No,
there's
truck
no drug.
fight.
Truck fight.
That comes later.
It comes later when they open up the trucks and they find all the drugs.
But what we do get is US-1 is like trying to figure out what's going on, and he opens up his radar scope, and his brain communicates with the radar scope, and they find a blimp in the sky.
What? A blimp?
Yeah, and the blimp, I guess, is firing down on them and is letting the other trucks know where they're going. So instead of getting like a radar plane, they had a blimp. But what you didn't know is just like Batman's utility belt, the US-1 truck has many things it can use to take care of itself. And in this case, he releases smokescreen. And a smokescreen comes up over everything, and it prevents the blimp from tracking them.
It's like he's driving Kit from Knight Rider, but in a big truck. But Knight Rider also had a big truck. Oh my gosh! And then just in a big truck.
And then we flip the page, and
oh hey, I want to get big like Atlas.
I know you're wanting more of the story, but Atlas is huge, and you could be a slam dunker too. And more importantly, you could subscribe to Wolverine comics and other comics for only 42 cents a copy.
42 cents a copy. Man, we could have got US-1 for 42 cents.
Well, this was tough because, it does say offer expires May 31, 1983, so you should be very careful there. But what I will say is this comic was 60 cents, and this had just gone up from 50 cents. And if you just went from 50 to 60 cents, you got US-1. I mean, think of the quality. Like, Marvel expands their line just for you, so they can go to 60-cent comics, and they could give you this fine book.
Wild.
All right, so what we now get back to is a whole situation where US-1 finds an encampment of bad guy truckers, and all of those bad guy truckers have a smuggling ring.
All the bad guys.
And they're just chatting. But because this is like a comic from the 80s, we can't really say that they're smuggling drugs, that they're bad guys. We did see some guns, sort of, but it looked like the Pew Pew gunfighter from maybe G.I. Joe.
Yeah, because it looked like laser
pink and red
shots.
laser
And I was like,
shots.
whoa, lasers!
And definitely nobody's dying. Because remember, we had the Comics Code Authority on this, which means we can't say that police are bad. Die. We can't say that there are drugs. We can't say that they're smuggling. We can't really say that anything's bad. And you can't, by the way, with the Comics Code, you can't disparage professions. So if these folks are truck drivers, then you can't actually say that they're smugglers because they're truck drivers.
And
right?
that's bad.
And that's a profession, so we can't say that truck drivers are bad people.
What if they're human traffickers?
You can't say, then the truck drivers are... No, see, truck drivers are professions, so you can't do that because we have to make sure that everything's okay.
Not in
because
the 80s.
we had to protect people. Well, if you wanted the code stamp. I mean, you could go without the code stamp, but then nobody would distribute your comic books, so
Then you would have to do like Robert Crumb books.
it's kind of terrible. Well,
That's a whole other bag.
we get our heroes have driven the truck, though, up on a rock,
Oh, yeah.
and they're looking down.
Looking
but
down
then
on an
retread, because he's really clumsy, he slips, and he falls down the entire hill and crashes in.
While firing a pistol.
Well, he's...
Oh no! Kapow, kapow, kapow.
Well, they're firing pistols at him. Oh,
Yeah,
he's
they're
holding one
firing-
too. Yeah.
He's holding one too, but we find out it's not a real gun. It's a flare gun.
But this distraction is fine because US-1, which strangely looks like Optimus Prime, drives down the hill as fast as it can, and there we go. US-1 captures an old man. Well, he grabs the old man.
He grabs the old man. He's
'Cause
trying
he
to help
was-
the old.
He thought the old man was
'cause-
captured by the guys.
because those guys are whooping
Oh, well,
on
I'm
him.
spoiling the end. I said he thought...
Well, he's whooping.
My bad.
The old man is getting whooped on by everybody.
I'm so sorry I
and
spoiled that.
You didn't spoil the old. You didn't spoil anything. Stop. The old man is captured. He's getting captured. US-1. He comes in and he starts whooping on all those guys. And the funniest part I find is like, we got Retread sliding down the hill. US-1 is sitting there and he's like Retread's karate kicking people. US-1 is sitting there and he's got a metal head, right? And some dude goes to hit him and it's like, bong! And then he's like, oh, wait a second.
There was another one called Clung.
Klung! And then he's like, I'm gonna just headbutt these dudes. And he's like, ka-ka, ka-ka, ka-ka! And he hits them all in the face with his head. I know, it's a lot. What?
Well, he doesn't want to damage that.
Yeah, but he has to.
Well, anyway, we get in a giant fight, and eventually they get piled up on, but US-1 calls the truck,
With his brain head.
and the truck comes flying at everybody, and everybody scatters because they don't want to be run over by Optimus Prime. I mean, I'm going to get copyrighted, US-1. So now we know what inspired the Transformers. It was so good to find this out today.
US-1.
US-1 is the origin for everything.
It is the
is.
origin for everything. US-1 is clearly the origin for everything.
Yeah.
Well, despite this fight,
Oh, these bullpen bulletins are great, though.
Oh, yeah. I would like to point out, though, we get a bullpen bulletin from Jim Shooter, not Stanley. And the other thing is, this book isn't old enough to have a letter column. If it was old enough to have a letter column, because we're only in issue 3, and your letter column's probably not going to show up till issue 4, and that's probably going to cover issue 1, I would have loved to read the reviews of issue 1 to see what the fans were saying
What kind
about
of
this
wild,
book.
crazy stuff are you doing here?
And
But apparently, like some of the notes, though, and what we talk about in previous episodes, is that a lot of stuff that's going on in comics history at this time or right before there's a lot of shakeups going on in the industry, kind of like what we have going on.
And if you want to know what was going on right now, we've got the Thing #1, which is the issue where Thing breaks off from the Fantastic Four, and you eventually get She-Hulk in the Fantastic Four. So actually, there was a historically cool thing happening, just not this comic.
Well, I was talking more about the changes in the editorial staff at Marvel that was coming over from other comic book companies.
Or the Marvel people that were all leaving to go to DC
that's what
because they love Jim Shooter.
So that's what's in the bullpen bulletin, is that he's saying, hey, our products are still great. Don't worry. We're going to still put out good books. We're just changing some staff right now. So you're going to see some new names like da-da-da-da-da.
Like Larry Hannah, well,
yeah, Larry
anyway.
Hannah.
Well,
Which was great. I loved
that was probably great. Well, and we get an ad for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
What?
Which, yeah, there we go. So,
Oh, wait, that's not.
well, isn't it funny that the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was in the book about demon truckers? So
Demon truckers.
because you all know those people that played D&D in 1983 were probably murdering people in parks. Anyways,
Okay. Side note.
that's what the news said when I was little.
Well, and that's what the Tom Hanks movie all about D&D was about. It was if you go into a cave with your friends, you're gonna have a bad time playing D&D real life, and you might kill a friend thinking they're a goblin.
Well, I can't wait.
story.
We're to the last page, and this wrap up is fantastic because you're not going to believe this. We get a freaking Scooby-Doo wrap up.
Wow.
Yeah. So literally, the old man. They grab him and they pull his mask off. No. And he's nothing.
He's nothing. He was never there.
Because this is how Milgrom's best work. How much involvement do you think the Ralph Macchio, the editor, had in this? Was Ralph Macchio just like going back to him and saying, "Yeah, can you rewrite page 19 because we wanted a Scooby-Doo ending"?
Just fix it, make the Scooby-Doo ending, and
right,
we'll
like,
wrap it up so we later on.
We had an ending where Johnny Cash and the Highwaymen show up and they start singing songs, and that was gonna happen. But instead, we got a Scooby-Doo ending.
The most disappointing one ever.
Well, that's what happens when you sell your soul to a demon to become the best of the best.
Well, what we find out by the end of this book is that US has won a mask and a shirt because he pulled them off, and he gets to end the show with it.
He gets to wear it.
I mean,
like
the
a
comic
skin
with it.
suit that everybody. Wait, oh, that's another. I mean,
I just realized this is the inspiration for Obi-Wan in Star Wars.
This is the
you are 100% correct.
in fact, George Lucas read this comic in 1983, went back in time, and was inspired to write the Obi-Wan character for Star Wars, because US-1 is the inspiration for all other things.
Lives in the desert.
Well, the good news is at the end of the story, Retread comes back and says, "Woohoo! Finally got the flames out." From when he slid down the hill? Because his butt was on fire?
No, he set himself on fire with a flare gun.
I thought it was from sliding down the hill when his butt was on fire.
No, he fired the flare gun, set himself on fire, and he goes, "Ah, no, I'm on fire."
I think it could be either way. I mean, there's room for interpretation here.
He set himself on fire.
Well, anyway, US-1 says at the end, he says, "About the story the old man told us about the highwayman selling his soul to the devil and becoming immortal for a price, I can't help but wonder how much of that story was true."
Oh.
The end.
Dun, dun, dun.
And we get a nice ad for Epic's Coyote written by Steve Englehart, which was probably a lot better than this book and probably nobody bought.
And also a follow-up ad for the network game Tron.
Well, he focused in on Tron, and I focused on sell as many greeting cards as you can so you can have epic prizes from the Olympic Sales Club.
Never worked for me because I didn't know enough people in the neighborhood.
Well, as we start to wrap this one up, we've got an ad for the Kool-Aid Man.
Oh, yeah.
Nebraska representation.
Who played the Kool-Aid Man game?
You?
I did.
Yeah.
It was on the Atari.
I have it.
I got the Atari, so I was maybe... I hate to admit this to an audience. Like, we were so poor, I didn't get an Atari until the Nintendo came out, and I had to buy it from a friend for $15. And then I got whatever games with it, so if I got a free game, I was pretty excited.
Free games.
Like, I wore out some Joust because somebody gave it to me for free.
Joust is a solid game still.
Joust is a solid game still. So is Q*bert. Those
Q*bert
were
is
some big
solid.
fan games.
Pac-Man ported over to the Atari. Not so great, though.
But Kool-Aid Man, I'm going to tell you, not one of the greatest games in history.
E.T.'s even better.
Good premise. Good premise.
a lot.
A whole game where you break through, like, barriers. I mean, that's pretty basic Atari gaming right there. But what this is also advertising is Marvel Comics' The Adventures of Kool-Aid Man. And let me tell you, as we've told our listeners, if you brought us a copy of US-1, we'd review it. If you bring me a copy of The Adventures of Kool-Aid Man, I will definitely review The Adventures of Kool-Aid Man. I will even do research on the authors and the writers and figure out why in the world they ever decided to do Adventures of Kool-Aid Man. My guess is a paycheck. Okay, so just so you know, we're at Ocon, we're in Nebraska. Well, we're not in Nebraska, but we're basically in Nebraska.
Yeah.
It's across it's literally across the river.
We're like in Nebraska North, known as Iowa.
We're like what?
It's like Kansas City.
And there's a Kool-Aid Man museum.
Kool-Aid Man
Kool-Aid,
Museum.
and we need to go there.
I'm just gonna bust through the wall and say, "Oh yeah!"
Kool-Aid style. Wait,
Yeah.
Kool-Aid style?
Kool-Aid style?
I don't think he said that.
I don't know.
Well,
The bigger question is the Kool-Aid Man the glass or or is it the drink? I don't understand.
It's like a human.
I think it's disturbing.
So,
like
if
the
you take
Kool-Aid.
if you take one away, do you still have the Kool-Aid Man?
Well,
or do
no,
you need
because
both?
it's like the Wonder Twins, which was always disturbing. Like he made himself into like ice cubes, and Gleek would bring a pitcher, and then they drank the Kool-Aid out of the ice that Zan was in. That's gross. They were like drinking Zan, and that's what the Kool-Aid Man is like. That's why he's so happy.
You are what you eat.
Well, we should wrap this.
We
got to wrap this thing up.
We do have to wrap it up, but
so-
you buried the lead as to why US1 was made in the first place, because we talked a lot about advertising
That
in
is
this
true.
episode. We talked a lot about the advertisements in the book, and we talked about the Kool-Aid Man game and the advertising in the.
All right. So Tyco Slot Cars thought it would be a great idea to take something they made in 1979 as a toy and have Marvel Comics make it into a comic in 1983. except there's no reference to the slot cars or anything in the actual book, just a magical truck. So basically, like, if it was 4 years later and I guess you were lucky enough to find those US1 toys, then you could go back in time as a kid and be inspired to. But I don't see anything in this comic that tells me to go look for US1 toys, which is really off the mark, because within a year and a half, I think it was 85, we'll get Star Comics line in Marvel Comics, and we'll get all sorts of things like the Care Bears and things like that in comics. So instead of doing something like this, Marvel just goes ahead and embraces it and runs the Star line and just says, well, we're just going to be an advertising line for toys. So this is, I guess, the first attempt, but not the best, because I don't say the Care Bears comics are good, but at least they were written for kids, and at least they had, met their mission of advertising the thing.
Yeah.
Do you think Jim Shooter learned from that when he made Secret Wars to sell Marvel toys?
Okay, the question was, do we think Jim Shooter learned from that to use Secret Wars to make Marvel toys? No, Jim Shooter learns from no one, because he's Jim Shooter and he knows everything.
That's true. He doesn't need to learn from people because he's so smart.
Like, someday I'm going to go get Jim Shooter's autograph, and he's like, I heard you quoted as saying I never learned from anybody because I know everything. And I'm going to like, Mr. Shooter, that's true. That's why I want your autograph.
I have his autograph because he was here for...
He was a guest for Free Comic Book Day here in Omaha.
Oh.
He was here. Yep.
I actually am a little bit jealous of that,
So
because I would be
jealous.
going and getting my Adventure Comics Legion stuff signed by Jim Shooter, so I'm a bit jealous of that. I did see that Jim Shooter was out and around, so I am sort of anxious to get his podcast, but I feel like my conversation as a Legion fan with Paul Levitz is going to go very different than it does with Jim Shooter. So, but admittedly, I don't want to just keep picking on Jim Shooter, because his run at Marvel as the editor wasn't great. He tried, but I will give him some credit. He tried it was the new, I said it in the last episode, but that new line, whatever comics, and he tried to do some new superheroes like Starbrand and did try to get some things out there.
Yeah.
He did do a few things. So at least Jim Shooter tried to do some things, I will say that. And, you got to give props to somebody who was 13 years old when they wrote their first comic book, and they actually sent it into a publisher with full, there we go, DP7, with full thumbnails. So if you don't know Jim Shooter's history before he became an editor, pretty fantastic that he could do all the thumbnails and everything as a comic book, writer, and then have, famous people like, the most famous Superman artist ever drawing over Jim Shooter.
Yeah.
So that's, when Swan draws over you, that's pretty amazing. So
I mean, the fact that he was doing all that while he was going to high school, bouncing around
going
from
to
college,
junior high.
junior high, high school, college.
But then then he went to college, he left the industry, and he came back.
But this is what you have to do sometimes.
And then he went to DC, and then he went to Marvel to be the editor.
Yeah,
because
that's a pretty good career.
Because he had a business degree, so now he can be an editor.
That's
and
what you gotta do.
if you and for those of you in the workforce, as we all know, if you have a business degree, that makes you qualified to be in charge automatically. So just note to yourselves, if you want to be in charge, get a business degree, then that makes you in charge, even if you don't know what you're talking about. So that's the perfect way to do this.
That's how you do it.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap this puppy up. Greg, do you have anything to plug on this podcast?
Well, as always, Junior Braves of the Apocalypse is a book that I write with Michael Tanner. And if you're here at the Ocon, you can come find us at our table. But if you're not...
Well, they're not going to be at the Ocon. Well, they are here. These folks are here
These
at the
folks
Ocon.
are here
The
at the
people
Ocon.
listening to this next Wednesday are not going to hear this
Well, I know.
at the Ocon. So
I
they're
was-
not going to know we're at the Ocon. That's why we advertise the Ocon on every other podcast before this one. So you were doing good with the plugs, but then you plugged something that we're already doing that people won't be able to do after they hear this.
Womp womp. I know. Exactly.
Purchase off the internet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
well,
could.
I was
You
gonna
could come
say-
to the next year's Ocon.
Yeah, and then find us here.
So look in the future. So when you're listening to this like a year from now, because you're listening to our podcast, then you could, and you're re-listening to it every week because it was so amazing, you can come back to Ocon the next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have anything else to plug?
Well, Starlight issue 6 is
Starlight issue 6 will be on Kickstarter.
we don't have a date exactly yet, so you got to come to our Facebook page, our Instagram.
Or you can go to Overcast Comics and you
yeah,
could buy
the
the first
website.
5
Oh my
PDFs and read the series and then get involved in it. And by the way, really, I'm not just saying this because Greg's my friend. Issue 5, we reviewed it last episode, and I read it and couldn't go to sleep for an hour because I was thinking so much after reading the issue. And for those of you that listened to the last podcast now, so this won't be a spoiler, if you catch the reference, you'll get it. When we signed in to do the podcast, I logged in as Annie Wilkes just to let Greg know how I thought about him reading that book.
I was scared as hell.
Well, we want to also, like we always do, plug the store, the Retro Emporium in Kent, Washington. If you are stopping by, visit Ann, and you'll often see Greg there too,
might see
and
me.
relive your childhood. So thanks so much for listening to this one. I hope you had fun with it. And if I know I can't find it, so you're going to have to find the book, because this isn't available anywhere to actually read electronically, and I just can't imagine why. Marvel hasn't prioritized putting this fine book up electronically so people can find it to read it. So there will be no link to this book in the podcast notes. I'm sorry. And that's it. Bye, Greg. Say goodbye.
Bye, Greg.
Say goodbye, Greg.
I'm trying to. Do you know where the button is?
Yeah.